There are a number of things that I'd like to talk about tonight, particularly inasmuch as we are speaking to young people and a young person is speaking to you. We see that we have our requisite senior citizens. But we're young people here tonight, and we want to talk about things that young people ought to be thinking about. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is talk to you about the goal-setting process and then go from that into the kinds of goals that we ought to be thinking about. As we listen to all of the newspaper reports about schooling and the difficulty that we're having with busing, etc., I'm reminded of a favorite story that Elder Von Featherstone tells of a young man who comes into breakfast one morning and announces that he is not going to go to school. His mother was very concerned and started to go through the process that mothers often have to do, explaining why he ought to go. After several minutes, he said, "Mother, I am not going to go to school today. The teachers hate me. The students hate me. I am not going to go." And his mother made another feeble attempt, and he finally said, "Mother, you give me 2 reasons why I ought to go to school today, and I'll go." And she thought about it for a moment, and then she said, "Well, number 1, you're 44, and number 2, you're the principal." Whatever your reason for being here tonight, I really appreciate your being here. And I hope that together we can accomplish something that hopefully we can remember. And as we go away, as we remember it, hopefully do something with it. Whenever I'm introduced, as this gracious young man did, and said that Hyrum Smith is going to give us a fine talk, the whole principle of developing expectations and having those expectations not met by our realization floods through my mind. And there's a great story that goes along with that. It's told of the man who was out fishing in his favorite fishing hole, and he had just purchased a brand new ring, a very expensive diamond, cost him a great deal of money. As he was pulling a fish into his boat, his ring slipped from his finger and disappeared into the murky water. Frantically, he dropped his pole, forgot about the fish, dived into the water to try and find his ring. Couldn't find it. Got back in his boat, went home, very angry and discouraged about losing this very expensive ring. A year later, he came back to his favorite fishing hole, and he was fishing, and he caught a large fish. Pulled the fish into the boat and was cleaning it with a very sharp knife, and while he was cleaning it, he cut into something hard. And very excitedly, with great expectations, he looked into the fish to see what it was and discovered it was his thumb. Now that is the story about our expectations not being met by our realization. And I hope that what we accomplish here tonight can some way meet each of our expectations. I'm going to talk about goal setting tonight because as I have come to know People just don't set goals. Do you know that less than 3% of the American people are working on a specific set of goals that really mean something to them? The insurance industry tells us that, and another statistic that they give us is that less than 5% of the American people at age 65 can put their hands on $5,000 in cash. And the reason they can't is because they didn't plan to. And sure enough, when they turn 65 and they open their bank book, it just isn't there. We are not establishing goals that mean something to us and then going after them with all our beings to accomplish them. Now, because of that concern, and I look at young people, and I see young people going through the high school process and see some of the goals that could be set and some of the achievements that could be achieved, and it frightens me that perhaps we're not doing it. Now, to help us do that tonight, I'm going to teach you a poem. You probably know I'm big on poetry. My missionaries have heard this many times and may have one of them come quote it for you. But I'm going to teach you a poem tonight that we are going to learn together. I don't want to do all the talking tonight. I want to listen to you learn a poem. And I can best describe this poem to you by telling you the following story. When I came back from the military, I spent 3.5 years in the Army, 2 of which were in Germany. We came back, my wife and I were married while we were in the military. We came back to finish our schooling at Brigham Young University. Instead of getting into one of the student wards, we went out to this metropolis of Orem. which is right next door to Provo, and we found ourselves in one of the member wards there. Well, it has been our practice ever since we were married that when we moved into a new ward, we would immediately go to the bishop and say, "Bishop, we're Hyrum and Gail Smith. We're new in your ward. We have to have a job in 10 days or we will be inactive." And that makes bishops very nervous. And so within about a week, the bishop came over with his counselors, and he called us to be the Explorer Advisor. Now, I say us because that calling requires us. And I discovered that that is probably the celestial calling in the church. When I get released from here, I have an Explorer post all picked out back in Portland, Oregon. That's going to be mine. Well, I got excited about that, and I went to Mutual that first Wednesday night, and I just couldn't wait. I was thinking about all the great things that we were going to do, the goals we were going to set, and all the marvelous things we were going to do. And I walked into the room, the classroom. In fact, the building, interestingly, that we met in is the identical twin of the building that we're meeting in. In fact, it's got a celestial basketball floor. It's just right for us old men. You can shoot from one end to the other. I walked into the room that night, and there sat 5 cool priests. Have you ever met a cool priest? They were sitting there, and their body language was speaking very loudly. They weren't saying anything with their mouths, but their body language spoke. You know what body language is, don't you? It's how we speak with our arms and legs. They were sitting there, and one of them had his arms draped back across the chair like this, and another one was rocked back on his chair, the chair up between his legs, and he was back like this. And what they said to me with their expressions and with their bodies as I walked in was, "I dare you to teach us something." And I thought to myself as I walked through the door, boy, am I in for it, and I was right. So I walked in and I sat down. Well, I said, "Brother, I'm your new Explorer Advisor," and I thought they'd be exciting about that, And we had an opening prayer, and I said, "Let me tell you a little bit about me." I said, "I'm Hyrum Smith, and I was raised in Hawaii." And then, terrific, Hawaii. And then I went on to tell him a little bit about Hawaii and what a neat place that was. You'd be interested, you young people. Brother Hokie was my primary teacher when I grew up. That's why I turned out so neat. I told him a little bit about Hawaii, and I said, "How would you, brethren, like next year to go to Hawaii? We'll earn the money together. I'll show you what to do, and we'll put a project together, and we'll go spend 2 weeks in Hawaii. And I know people in the Navy. We can go to Pearl Harbor, and we can go to the church college." And I started building this great tale of how neat it was going to be for us to go to Hawaii. And I thought they would just come off the roof excited. Hawaii, I'd kill to go to Hawaii. Well, they didn't react that way. And after I got through and I started to wind down, I said, finally, I wanted a reaction. I said, "What do you think about that, guys?" And one of them said, "Gee, that's great, Brother Smith, and the year after that, we'll go to the moon. What do you think about that?" "Yeah, we'll go to Hawaii, Brother Smith." And they laughed me out of the room. Well, I was just devastated. We had a closing prayer, and I came home, and I described this experience to my wife, and I said, "Have you ever met 5 cool priests?" They had the hair and the shirts open to their navels. They were just... Well, the next day I went to one of my brethren that I knew there in the ward who had these boys as scouts. His name was Brother Cross. I went to Brother Cross, and I said, "You've got to tell me. I just got wiped out last night." And I told him what had happened, and he just laughed. He thought that was right. He says, "Let me tell you something, Brother Smith." He said, "In the last year, those boys have had 6 different Explorer Advisors, and every one of them has presented some great trip." He says, "I'll grant you none of them is as ambitious as Hawaii, but they've been promised all kinds of trips, Disneyland in California, the Uintas, and all this stuff, and not one of them came through. They didn't do any of it." And he said, "So when you came in last night and introduced yourself and said, 'How'd you like to go to Hawaii?' just went off their scope." And he said, "I could tell you what happened," and he knew. Well, I thought about that a little bit, and so I was ready the next Wednesday. I went back, and I was armed for bear. I went back into our classroom, and there sat in the same positions as if they had slept there for a week, my 5 cool priests. So I sat down, and we had our opening prayer, and, they were saying the same things, and I said, "Brother, I want to tell you something." I said, "Next summer, my wife and I are going to Hawaii." And I said, "Whether any of you go with me or not, I could care less. But we're going. You know what I mean? If you want to go with me, Fine. You do what I tell you to do, you can go. Otherwise, forget it. Well, the body language started to change then. You know, the arm came off the chair, and the guy pulled forward on his chair, and he looked at us and said, "You're really serious about this, aren't you, Brother Smith?" And I said, "Yeah, I am really serious about it. Are you interested?" "Well, yeah, we're interested." And I said, "Well, let me tell you, if you're interested, there are going to be a very strict set of rules that you need to conform to before you can go. And the first one is you've got to memorize a poem." "Oh, terrific. Let's memorize a poem." And I introduced them that night to the poem. Here it is. "There is no chance, no destiny, no fate that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul." What do you think about that poem, brother? "Oh, that's terrific, Brother Smith. You know, they didn't know what it meant. The words didn't mean anything to them. But I said, you're going to learn that poem. We're going to recite that. That will be our theme for the next 11 months while we're working on this trip to Hawaii. There is no chance, no destiny, no fate that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul." Then I said there are going to be other rules. And I said, we're going to have a point system. And you have to have a certain number of points to be able to get on the airplane. You can earn points by earning money. You can get points by going to all your church meetings, by wearing a uniform to Mutual, by having a military haircut, and oh, was that a bite. You can get points for all of these things, and the winner's going to get one of these Centennial Winchester rifles. Have you ever seen one of those, the gold breech and the octagonal barrel? Beautiful weapon. Winner's going to get that. Well, they started to get a little excited about this. And then in the next 11 months, we put on 29 major fundraising projects to earn the money to go to Hawaii. And about 90 days into this project, we discovered that there weren't 5 cool priests, but there were 17. And these 17 were inactive. And as these 5 started to talk about Hawaii, and the first one, the ringleader, showed up one day at school in a military haircut. The other 17 decided we were probably serious, and they started to come. Well, as a result of the excitement of those 17 guys, we earned the money. Let me describe a couple of the projects. We sold everything. We sold pizzas, we sold pies, we sold cufflinks, we sold fire extinguishers, we sold cookies, we sold a cow, we sold, one of the members came up missing his boat, we had sold that. We sold everything. These 17 kids turned into one of the finest sales forces that Orem, Utah had ever seen. There was an old bulldozer that was out in front of the church. It had been there for 12 years. In fact, it was right out that door of the building, just like this one. It had been there, and I went to the bishop, and I said, "Bishop, can we have the bulldozer?" And he said, "What are you going to do with it?" I said, "We're going to sell it." And he says, "We've been trying to sell that bulldozer for 12 years. What makes you think you can do it?" I said, "You give it to me, we'll sell it." "It's yours," he said. So I went to another member of the ward who was a welder by trade, and I said, what would it take to cut up that bulldozer? He said, "What do you mean, cut up that bulldozer?" I said, "Cut it up in little pieces so we can sell it." He says, "Do you have any idea how much acetylene would take to cut up a bulldozer?" I said, "Whatever it takes, you cut it up, we'll buy your acetylene." Well, he got intrigued by the idea, so he shows up with his tanks and proceeds to cut this bulldozer up into pieces about this big. All 17 boys show up. We borrowed an old septic tank truck from one of the other brethren, by hand loaded on this steel, took it down to Utah Steel and sold it for $650 after we paid for the acetylene. Well, we were ecstatic. The bishop could not believe it. In fact, he almost asked us for the money because he was having budget problems. He said, "Bishop, that money's not yours." Another thing we did is we had a concert. Remember, every week now, every Wednesday night while we're going through this process, they would stand and say, "There is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul." Well, the next thing we did is I went to Brother Reed Nibley of the BYU. Reed Nibley, Hugh Nibley's brother. Hugh Nibley is a great Book of Mormon scholar that you might be aware of. Reed Nibley, his brother, is probably one of the finest pianists in the United States, in the world for that matter. I knocked on Brother Nibley's door and I said, "Brother Nibley, you don't know who I am, but I know who you are, and I have 17 explorers who have never seen a really first-class piano concert. And we want to know if you would be willing to put on a benefit concert for us. We'll sell tickets. We're good salesmen." And he just laughed, and he says, "I don't put on benefit concerts for anybody. So I'm under contract with CBS. I can't do that." And I said, now, Brother Nibley, you could do it for us if you want. And we talked for a long time, and he started to get intrigued about these 17 boys going to Hawaii. And I taught him the poem. Well, he really got intrigued about the poem, and he says, I'll tell you what, Brother Smith, he said, if you won't tell anybody, I'll do a concert for you. I said, I'll only tell the people we sell tickets to. He said, you got a deal. And he got so excited about it, he went to the first violinist of the Utah Symphony, who was first he called, and he said, look, these guys are going to Hawaii. How about you coming and we'll do a first-class violin piano concert for them. Oh, he got excited, so he came too. Well, we went out and we made about $750 on that. And the night of the concert, because these boys had never seen a really first-class concert, they'd been to the other kind, you know, there are lots of those. They'd never been to a really first-class one where good music was played, and we're not going to talk about the music tonight. That night they were going to be the ushers, and they got all duded up in their Sunday clothes, and I sat down with them before the concert, and I said, now, brother, this is a first-class concert, a classy concert. This is not your typical ward function. There are no crying babies in a classy concert. Not only that, if somebody comes in late, they don't come in during one of the numbers like you're used to. They wait until the number's over, and during the applaud, then they can sneak in and sit down. There will be no noise in this. Do you understand? Yes, sir. There will be no noise. Well, the concert started, and halfway through, some gracious lady from Orem had brought a baby. And halfway through the concert, the baby started to cry. And out of nowhere, 4 of my boys appeared in front of this lady, ripped her baby from her arms, and raced out into the foyer with the baby, with this woman chasing behind them. They got out into the foyer, and the young man presented the baby back to her, and he said, lady, this is a classy concert. There are no crying babies in a classy concert. Well, she learned a great lesson that night, as these young brethren did. Well, it was a marvelously exciting thing. We would go to the elders' quorum presidents of many of the wards there in Orem. We could tell they weren't doing their farm projects because the apples weren't getting thinned and picked like they ought to, and we would hire out to do their jobs for them. We'd show up at 5:30 Saturday morning with 17 of us, 19 of us really, my wife and me, and we'd thin apples. We did a lot of things. Well, they discovered what the power of that poem was. The requirement was that they had to know that poem by heart before they got on the airplane. And so that day finally came to go to Hawaii. And we had our uniforms. They all had full uniforms. And one of the members of the ward had gotten emotionally involved in what we were doing and donated these red jackets. Have you seen these red Explorer jackets? And even embroidered our names on them in nice yellow lettering. Well, there we stood at the Salt Lake Airport, and boy, they're still talking about this at the Salt Lake Airport, I want you to know. All 19 of us in our uniforms. First boy got his ticket, went up the steps of the airplane, United Airlines, handed his ticket to the stewardess and said, there is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul. What do you think about that? Oh, that's great, kid. Next boy up the plank, handed a ticket. There is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul. 17 times. I went up the stairs of the airplane last. I handed her my ticket, and she said, stop. And she said, let me tell you the poem. And I said, great. And she said, there is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul. I said, isn't that a great poem? She said, yeah, that's a great poem, and we're 30 minutes late. Would you mind if we left? Well, we flew to San Francisco, and on the way, all the flight attendants learned our poem. They had it memorized. Got to San Francisco, got on another airplane, and between San Francisco and Honolulu, all 13 of the flight attendants, 747 has a lot of flight attendants, they all memorized the poem, even said it over the speaker system, all the people on that airplane. Well, they learn what it meant, and they get excited. They really got excited about establishing a goal and then being willing to pay the price, whatever it took. When we got over there, we had 2 marvelous weeks in Hawaii. We were the guests of the Navy for 3 days. We got to go out into Pearl Harbor on a destroyer. You know, boy, did they love that. We got to go out to the Church College of Hawaii. We stayed a couple of days there. We stayed with the Army for a couple of days and got tours. Saw everything. We went swimming. On one particular day, we went to a place called Pounders Beach, and it earned its name rightly over there by the temple. And I discovered that we had probably made a disastrous mistake. These kids from Orem had never seen a wave bigger than they saw in their bathtubs at home. And there they were out in the waves drowning, and so my wife would stand on the beach and count noses, and I was out in the water saving lives. But we got them all back alive. But the most exciting experience that happened while we were in Hawaii was during priesthood meeting. We were there for one weekend, and we went to priesthood meeting. Of course, all of us in uniform, red jackets, military haircuts. And while we were sitting there in priesthood meeting, in through the door came another explorer post from Nevada. And this was the cool variety. And there were about 8 or 9 of them, and they walked in, and they had no uniforms. They had the wild shirts open to the navels, the hair. They had all this stuff. They walked in, and there was an interesting electricity that all of a sudden between these two groups. I kind of sat off and I watched, and they're really eyeing each other up, and they wondered who these weirdos from Utah were. And after the meeting, they kind of drifted together, and I just stood off and listened to the conversation. And, where are you from? We're from Warren. Where are you from? Nevada, and a little chatter about what they're doing on the trip. Finally, one of my boys asked the question, how did you guys earn your trip? And the answer was, what do you mean, earn our trip? Man, our fathers wanted to know if we wanted to go to Hawaii, get us out of their hair for a week, so we came. No big deal. And what happened next was priceless. These 17 guys of mine, my 17 guys, gathered around these 9 and ate them for lunch. What do you mean you didn't earn your trip? Let me tell you how we got here. And then they just laid it on thick. 2 or 3 of them. There is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control a firm resolve of a determined soul. They didn't know what that meant. But watching the excitement of those 17 guys just drummed those others into the ground. We earned our trip. Well, young people, I hope that when you decide to do something, that anyone who is aware of the fact that you decided to do it will say, consider it done. So-and-so said he was going to do it. Now, I want you to say that poem with me. The first line is, there is no chance, no fate, no destiny. Everybody say that with me. There is no chance, no fate, no destiny. Say it again. There is no chance, no fate, no destiny. Second line. That can circumvent or hinder or control. Say that with me. That can circumvent or hinder or control, last line, the firm resolve of a determined soul. Say that with me. The firm resolve of a determined soul. From the beginning. There is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul. I'm going to have 2 or 3 of you stand up and say this for me, so you better have it memorized. What does circumvent mean? What does circumvent mean? This lady right here in the black and white dress. Yes. What does circumvent mean? Okay, prevent's a good word for it. What's another way of describing circumvent? Sidestepping? All right, good. You understand what circumvent? What does hinder mean? Get in the way. Are you beginning to understand what this means? What does resolve mean? Determination. When you make a resolve to do something, what do? You do it. What is the definition of an obstacle? An obstacle is something that you see when you take your eye off the goal. That's what an obstacle is. There are no obstacles if you have the right vision. Most of us live down here like this. But every once in a while you got to look up here like this. Look at the sky and all the great things you can do. Then we're right back down here. That's where we live. Well, learn the magic of that poem and maybe you'll start living like this. And then pretty soon you'll get up here and there aren't any obstacles. You can do anything you decide you're going to do. Now here's a good example. Last year you didn't do very well in math. So this year we make a firm resolve that I am going to get an A in math this year. And so we start working that the first part of the year, and the midterm comes, and the big exam, the midterm exam, which is going to determine half of my grade in math, is tomorrow and tonight. is the big dance. And I have a date with him. Not just anybody, mind you. This is with him. What does the poem say? Nothing is going to get in the way of my resolve to get a good grade. So we just call him up and say, listen, him, I can't go tonight. Tomorrow's a big test, and I am going to do well in math this year. Maybe next week. You have the strength to do that? Say the poem with me again. There is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul. Who would like to stand and quote that for us? Everybody. It's amazing when I ask that, everybody goes, what's so interesting up there? Who would like to do it besides my missionaries? All right, sir, stand and speak forth.
There is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of the eternal soul.
Do you believe that? Do you all believe that? That's very good. You just made my whole evening. I'm going to run into you kids at some time between now and the next couple months, and I am going to ask you to tell me that poem. I want you to know that poem. Now, we know something about resolving firmly to do something. We're all determined souls here tonight, hopefully. Now let's move into the second phase of this experience tonight and talk about some of the goals that we want to set. Let's talk about the one that is probably the foremost in our mind most of the time because of the society we live on. And that's the goal, to keep ourselves morally clean. We decide, hopefully, as we go through our seminary and Sunday school and primary and mutual and any learning experience that we have the opportunity of going to, and we are taught the difference between right and wrong. There isn't any human being in this room tonight that doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. You know the difference. And when we're sitting in the warmth of this room, feeling each other's light, and it's well lit in here, if we were to ask you the questions that would determine whether or not you knew what it meant to be morally clean, not one of you would fail that test. You all know that fornication is wrong, that adultery is wrong, that masturbation is wrong, that petting is wrong. You know that. But for some reason, when we get away from this experience, where there isn't much light, we're up some canyon, and for some reason every high school was built by a canyon. And if you're up the canyon with that guy who you think is pretty neat and the windows are already steamed up, it is too late. You've got to make that resolve now. Nobody is going to get me in trouble. I am going to keep myself clean and pure. And you know why? Because I don't want my future husband or my future wife to have the bread that has already had the peanut butter licked off. You ever heard the allegory of the peanut butter? Today was Fast Sunday in my stake. If somebody had come to me with a beautiful piece of my wife's homemade bread with all peanut butter and jelly and said, how'd you like to have that? I would have probably broken his arm getting at it. But just before I reach for it, he pulls it back and he licks all the peanut butter and jelly off. And then he says, here, you can have what's left. Would you eat it? No. But isn't that what we ask our future spouse to do when we choose to fail in those areas? I hope with all my heart that you make a resolve, if you haven't done so before tonight. I am going to be clean. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what the popularity cost is, and boy, there is a cost there. I'm going to keep myself clean. Now, you young people, keep yourselves clean. The Lord needs you clean. If you don't decide you're going to be clean and you have yourself having to decide when the temptation is right there in your lap, it's too late. You've got to decide now and then just follow your own instructions and you'll make it. Everybody knows how to identify what we need to do. Everybody knows how to tell ourselves to do it. Less than 3% have the character to do it. Well, I plead with you young people to be part of that 3%. will you? Will you remember that first poem? There is no chance, no fate, no destiny that can circumvent or hinder or control your firm resolve when you're a determined soul. I know that Jesus Christ lives. I know he loves us. I know he knows who we are. He knows who you are. He knows what your weaknesses are, and he stands pleading with you to consider the alternatives, to say to yourself, what win I if I go this direction? When I'm presented with the drugs, what win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting, temporary joy. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week or a year or 10? My brothers and sisters, keep yourself right. Be a Nephi. I plead with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.